Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Talent Management webinar, sponsored by Class Technologies. I hope everyone is having a great start to their week and excited as I am for today's webcast, Stop the Sameness, Reimaging Virtual Experiences to Combat Disengagement. My name is Steve, and as always, I'll be working in the background here to help answer any general or technical questions you may have. Before we begin, though, I want to go over a few key reminders. First, there is no dial-in number for attendees. All audio will be streamed through your speakers or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a variety of icons. You will have access to all these tools throughout today's session, so please feel free to customize your console however you would like. Among these tools, we have the attendee chat, ask a question, and certifications. If you have any questions or experience any technical issues throughout this webcast today, please click on the purple icon marked Q&A, type the question in the box provided, and click Submit. If you have a technical question, the answer will appear here. Any content-related questions for our speakers today will be read at the end if time allows. The certification codes for this webinar will appear in the certification box located to the right of your slides once you have met the required watch time. Don't forget, you can chat with your fellow attendees by joining the live attendee chat. And finally, you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email, so please allow at least 24 hours after the conclusion of the event before the information is sent. And now at this time, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's webcast. We have Ashley St. John, Chief Content Officer and Editor-in-Chief for Better Work Media Group. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Ashley to get us started. So Ashley, take it away.
Thanks so much, Steve, and welcome everyone to today's discussion, Stop the Sameness, Reimagining Virtual Experiences to Combat Disengagement, the first in a four-part series sponsored by Class Technologies titled The Future Focused Organization. Again, I'm Ashley St. John. I'm Talent Management's Editor-in-Chief. We're so excited to kick off the conversation today, led by Ben Lowell of Class Technologies. And we'll be focusing on how corporations and organizations are getting creative and reimagining the digital and virtual experiences that they're offering to their workforce. So I don't want to take too much time away from the discussion, and we will be leaving some time for Q&A as well. So please be sure to share your questions with us as we go along. Without further ado, Ben, I'll pass the virtual mic over to you to introduce yourself and introduce our speakers who are joining us today as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate it. Everyone, my name's Ben Lowell. I'm excited to be with you. And what a topic. We've had quite the last year to 18 months and a lot of change and a lot of unexpected occurrences and events. So we've had, I think the whole world's been in for a doozy, and it's very interesting to see how organizations, companies, and others have adapted to our new surroundings and the new world in which we live. I'm excited to introduce our guests today, John Gleaney, VP of Talent with Shark Ninja, and Heather Cahoon, VP of Talent at Acon Group Incorporated. I'd love to give you both just a minute to introduce yourselves, give us some background of your history, what you've done, and then tell us a little bit about your role today. And let's get started there. I'll actually ask Heather, go ahead and let's start with you, and then we'll jump to John.
Thanks so much, Ben, and thanks Ashley and group for having me here today. So my background spans a number of aspects of talent, and started off in consulting, diversity and inclusion, engagement, change management, leadership development. Spent a number of years doing that, and then moved with actually a client into an in-house role, strategic HR business partner, HR director, and then on to lead talent acquisition, which was kind of that final piece of the talent portfolio that I hadn't done yet. So when the opportunity came across at Acon Group here, the talent portfolio does encompass all of those aspects. And so that was kind of that perfect next step. If I could just mention quickly about Acon Group. So we are predominantly up in Canada. For those of you on the phone, you can probably hear my accent. I think we've got a large U.S. population. You hear my difference in language here. But we are a leader in the construction infrastructure industry up here in Canada, and public and private infrastructure, civil urban transportation, nuclear, utilities, and industrial. So lots of major projects, small projects as well, and some international work too. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Heather. John, over to you.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. John Galini, VP Talent Development at SharkNinja. I've been in this space a little bit of a similar path to Heather, where I was in a lot of consulting roles over the years, was in the pharma industry for quite a bit as an instructional designer and a leadership consultant. Was a teacher for a bit of time. There are folks maybe out there who took a similar path as I did. I know Ben has a similar path where you at one point were a teacher and you made this leap into the corporate learning environment. And then, of course, that led to a talent development role. Been in leadership roles for about 12 years. SharkNinja is a 3,000 person or 3,000 employee consumer goods company. You might be familiar with the brands, but Shark is a vacuum, household goods, and Ninja is kitchen products. I think if you are familiar, you know what great products they are, and there's a great interest and commitment at SharkNinja to developing people, especially in COVID. There's been quite a bit of investment and a lot of attention on the employee experience, which of course I'm grateful for. So, thanks, Ben.
Great.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, John. Yeah. By the way, we just purchased another Shark vacuum. We had another brand that will remain nameless, and we just switched back to the Shark because we were not satisfied. Anyways, we also own a Ninja for all of my salsa blending and other food items amazing. That we love to blend. So it's funny that when you say that, I didn't even really think about it until you said both of those. And okay, so let's jump into this. I'd love to hear a little bit about how both of your organizations are, first of all, are addressing what is going on today. We know COVID has happened and now things are shifting, but we've had some ups and downs with deltas and all sorts of, let's go back to work, let's wait. So tell us how you are currently operating in the business. Are your employees all remote? Are they all in region, in office? Give us the situation and talk about how that has been, during this transition period. So John, let's start with you, and then we'll jump to Heather.
Sure. Like every other company, there's no rule book, right? There's no guidebook when COVID hit, and so we have been figuring it out as we have gone. We've done quite a good job. The leadership has been very good about kind of helping employees navigate through it. We're largely remote. We're hybrid in some areas of the business because we're a product company, consumer goods company. So there's an engineering component, there's a product development component, and those folks need to be in the office to be testing some of the equipment. And I think what I'm grateful for the way we navigated it, and the HR function has become so important in the COVID reality because we looked at things from even a Maslow's hierarchy of needs point of view. Where were people in their own current state of mind and in their own state of needs? And we learned quickly that people are still in this, they don't feel safe. They feel there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think what SharkNinja did a really good job with was to take a step back and provide our managers with tools to sort of assess where their teams were at on Maslow's hierarchy. It was a very directed process. It became part of our leadership development program. We encouraged our managers to assess their teams and then to work with those people individually to really link up to where they were and how they were feeling and what their state of mind was. And I do believe that really helped. That opened up a dialogue, I think, to allow employees to feel a little bit more settled, feel as if they were being paid attention to, and that the feelings they were having, that feelings of uncertainty, were not only quite natural, were okay. We're okay. And I think that would probably be a feature of how we managed our entrance into COVID, if you want to say, very effectively. It was a very effective process. We use things like town halls, like a lot of companies have. A lot of focus on creating those pathways for the I like to call them fountains and waterfalls, for the information to flow up and flow down. And so we did a really good job making sure that exchange of information was there, and that people, at least for the parts that we could predict and could know about, that we created a sense of security.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Heather, over to you. The same question.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I will echo some of what John said. And as he mentioned, I think a lot of companies have taken this similar approach or been faced with really similar challenges, right, of moving quickly to remote for any of our office workers. But for context, AECON is about 3,000 salaried office workers and about 7,000 folks in the field who are on our project sites. And so, as you can probably appreciate, they were essential services. They've been working day in, day out. Like, what changed for them was not where they work. It was all of the personal protective equipment, the masks, the shields, the gloves, the additional safety and cleaning protocols, right? We're right. A safety first culture. We're a learning culture. And I think the uniqueness that offered was HR and safety teams working really closely together. So there's a COVID safety team. There's a mental health safety committee that has struck up, and the learning team got involved by providing and offering some new learning opportunities in mental health. So again, I think similar to what John's talking about taking care of our employees, one of the tools was more offerings for our managers to understand mental health triggers and issues. We had actually a great response to mental health first aid. So a number of folks getting certified in mental health first aid in the company, and therefore trained to be able to be sort of mental health first aid responders, right? And that wasn't just leaders, that was folks on our construction sites as well. So our health and safety advisors and so forth. So trying to get that reach out so that, yes, people are feeling supported, and the changes that we've seen, I think, as we talk about kind of return to workplace, we're really talking about return to office for our office salaried folks. And we've seen a little bit of an ebb and flow there. We're not back in great volumes, though in some provinces, as with some states, right, we've got different regulations. There's some different permissions. So there are some folks who, over the past few summer months here in North America, have been headed into the office irregularly, but recognizing that face time is so important. And so creating some of that, I think people were really ready. When we talk about screen fatigue, and I know that's where we're going, but that was a big opportunity, right, was as folks could, ending some of that isolation, providing some of that infrequent and safe and protocoled opportunity, but to get back into that face-to-face.
Interesting. Wonderful. You both brought up some good points, and specifically you mentioned managers, and I found it interesting that you both bring that up, how important our managers are within our organizations, and how critical it is that they're, one, well trained and prepared. They have the tools and the resources available so that they can offer support. So I loved hearing. I feel like most of the organizations I've met with and discussed over COVID and how have functioned, it really did come down to managers, and how well are managers able to and equipped to help and assist employees during this difficult time. You mentioned physical safety, but also mental safety, mental health. And there's a little bit of a balancing act, right? We need to care for the physical safety of everybody during a pandemic, but then for everybody to be shut up in a home or a small studio apartment, or not in the office with peers, there are other dangers, like you mentioned, and other risks that we need to be aware of. So I appreciate that. I wanted to get into that a little bit deeper and ask. So you mentioned a few of the challenges, both of you. Heather, I'll ask this first to you. Specifically with your managers, what were the avenues that you utilized in order to make sure that, one, they had the proper training and the tools and resources, and two, to make sure that that ultimately that information and those resources were getting to the rest of the employees that they are responsible for?
Yeah, great question, Ben. And I think a few different channels. One thing that was really well established, has been for a long time, as I said, we have a learning culture. So we have a learning university, AECON University, and that's been a well-established brand internally. It's really a a strong channel for lots of learning activities. Of course, there was lots of classroom-based, and I know we'll chat about the pivots that we've all had to make to some of the more of that virtual, instructor-led trainings delivered differently. But the vehicle was there, if you will, and the habit and the source that folks knew sort of where to find it. I think the two other channels that I mentioned, the COVID team and our mental health team, really connected. So representation from various parts of the business, and then connected into our leadership. And we have a couple of leadership groups as well. And so operationally, there are a few channels for how to make sure that folks are getting the information that they need, and then talking in those channels about how do we cascade that. And the training certainly that we're mentioning, and piloting some of that new training. Mental health first aid was available to anyone, was advertised to everyone. So a regular e-blast monthly that goes out, anyone can sign up for. But that ended up being the start of a small series of 3-4 courses now that we have around mental health. And so, we've just got another one in development, actually just going on. No, it just finished about 15 minutes ago. We had a keynote speaker on mental health, and everyone was invited to that. So I think that the message we've been really working at, yes, the managers and helping our leaders understand and get access to resources, but we've also been working from, bottom up. And I think that's so important, is to really, you need multiple channels so that you hope to reach everyone in one way or another.
That's great. I appreciate that. I'm writing notes as you speak, to make sure I'm capturing any information. So hopefully that's not distracting. John, same question to you.
Not much different, frankly. I mean, good is good. So we took a sandwich approach as well. We focused for our managers on psychological safety. I mentioned an active exploration of Maslow's needs, because it helped frame up, that gauging where people were in their basic needs, safety and security. But then we turned to trusting relationships, social cohesion, individual purpose, as part of a team. And so we prioritize psychological safety as part of our programs. We talked about what it means to create cohesive teams. We leaned on a lot of the accepted best practice in terms of crucial conversations and some of the other books that are out there. But we also brought in outside speakers as well. We brought in speakers on burnout. What are the key themes to self-care? I think there was a huge, from the bottom up, there was a huge focus on how do we position employees to understand when they're burnt out, when they're not feeling well, when they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it all. And that self-awareness piece was a huge part of our strategy. And so from the manager's point of view, creating a team environment where there's ongoing conversations, candid conversations, a safe place for them to share how they're feeling. And then from the bottom up, programs, tools, strategies, resources to help folks be a little bit more aware of what self-care looks like, and the kinds of things that they should be doing and thinking about. Even going as simple as make sure you're taking your vacation. All of us have experienced this in COVID. We've been so worried about stability that we've not done things that we did before COVID, like making sure we took that vacation and took care of ourselves. And so, running programs that served as at least a reminder for employees to take care of themselves. And again, creating that environment where they can, we call it complain constructively. Like give them that environment where they feel like they're not being negative, they're complaining, but they're doing it constructively. And it becomes a sort of very healthy exchange. That catharsis is there, and make sure they link up or feel connected to their team.
Sure.
We got very focused on experiences. What are the employee experiences like, and then equipping managers with tools to create those interactions and those experiences.
That's great. And dovetailing off that, speaking of experiences, a bulk of organizations pre-COVID were running, a lot of their training live, in person, or at least a larger portion of it. And during COVID, most organizations, if they had training at all, were all forced to do things remotely. And according to the Accenture report that we've talked about with Trends 2021, there's a lot of screen fatigue, which is not surprising. I think we're all feeling that, but remote workers have reported that there's massive amounts of screen fatigue. And one of the recommendations in the report is I'm going to read this quote: organizations reconsider design, content, audience, and the interaction between them to inject greater excitement, joy, and serendipity into the screen experiences. So I'm curious, John and Heather both, what have you done to, one, address that screen fatigue and make sure that we can, not be so bogged down with, all of our remote training and remote meetings that we're having? And two, when you are in these training sessions, what are the ways that you've been able to identify that you can, tools or platforms or other design methods to engage your audiences differently and create a better learning experience, quote unquote? John, we'll start with you, and let's go to Heather.
Sure. So I think a reality check for us all is that screen fatigue's not going away. We acknowledge that it's there. It's certainly the nature of the work right now. You can't reinvent the whole experience because it's virtual, and that's that. So I think some part of this is an honest exchange around the acceptance that this is a little bit of our new reality, and that has helped, believe it or not. Again, I talk about that safe conversation that happens between managers and employees. Part of it is how you're feeling about this sort of experience in this little digital frame that everybody's experiencing each other through, this little picture frame. But I think more broadly, we looked at it in three ways. First, we spent a lot of time collecting and sharing strategies. People are running meetings all over the organization all the time. There's a lot of great things that are going on that aren't coming out of the corporate, brain trust. It's coming from all over the organization. And so first thing is, create a mechanism where there's a community of practice for virtual or other meetings. Like, how are people managing it and doing different things? And I think if you do this, you'll be very surprised we were about the different things that people are doing creatively. And some of the ideas we heard, certainly breakout rooms. I mean, no surprise to anybody here. But use breakout rooms in just team meetings. Like, they don't have to be in trainings. I think people were taken by surprise that you can use breakout rooms in large meetings, push people out, give them a topic, and then have them come back and talk about it. And then other things we heard were prompt people to do activities that take them away from their computer, like get creative. If you give someone a prompt or you want them to share something, have them go out and draw it or write it on a piece of paper and come back and share it, just to peel them away from this digital environment. And then, a lot of the other things we saw and heard that were really effective were just readapting current brainstorming methods. Like, before COVID, people would get in a room, brainstorm on a whiteboard. And so we encouraged people, go out and get a piece of foam core and get some Post-it notes, get away from your desk, brainstorm, and then hold the board up to the camera. Unconventional, certainly not perfect. But
love that.
The concept was get people away from this experience as much as you can. And then I think, tagging on this idea of experiences, one of the other things that we did was, there's a book out there called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. If you haven't heard of it, I think right now you should read it. It's about research that people tend to rate their overall experiences based on peak moments. And even the most miserable overall experiences, like going to a theme park where it's hot and miserable, you'll come back and 2 months later, you ask them how that experience was, and they'll give it a 10 because they had these peak moments. And so we trained managers on being aware of the power and importance of creating peak moments. So we gave them a couple quotes from the book. To elevate a moment, do three things. First, boost sensory appeal, as they say, and break the script. And you don't have to break the script and have these defining moments every meeting, but every 5 to 10 meetings, try to break it. Do something different. And again, the quote I loved was, the reason people hate meetings is that that emotion is deliberately squeezed out. And so People sit and listen to these programmed presentations, but it's a choice. And so encouraging managers to step away from the normal and try to create these peak moments, believe it or not, became quite a valuable conversation. And there was some great feedback from it. And the last thing I'll mention real quick is that for our formal programs, we went into a full-blown branding space, and we tried to operate like a small business. We built our entire program in the backdrop of COVID. And so I encouraged my team, and there were other teams across the organization who did the same, where they thought, what's our value proposition? How are we positioning our team as a small business? How are we branding ourselves? How are we interacting with our internal clients? And there's another book called The Business of Learning, and not to push too hard to read other people's books, but that's a great book because it really got our team and other teams around us in the mindset of, you really have to demonstrate your value proposition in this space. And that includes, what your brand is as a team, and then what experiences you're creating for others. And so those were sort of three big things that we did that I wouldn't say it changed the fatigue. I would just say it gave people a little bit more of an awareness of how you have to shift your thinking in this space. That's kind of how I would say it.
Excellent.
A bit longer of a diatribe. I apologize if I.
That's okay. No, awareness is a big key to that, right? If we're not aware of it, how are we even supposed to address? So awareness, and then coming up with some ideas, how to address that and to help. That's great. Heather, same to you. What can you say about ACON that you've done differently or tried to do in order to help out with screen fatigue generally, and what does that look like in training today?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think so similar to some of the strategies that John mentioned, of course, in terms of making those existing virtual trainings a little more interactive wherever we could. But I'd speak to a couple of very specific examples or strategies that worked. One thing I've really noticed is an increase in the storytelling. And I think it was John, it might have been you, who talked about we've missed that emotional connection, right? So our instructors, and that includes some of our talent team leaders, have done more storytelling. So you're hearing personal connections to why they're talking about something, to introduce the material. And I think that provides a hook that helps someone listen with a different connection to the person, especially because some of these folks have never met in person at all, right? COVID, someone started during the pandemic. You don't have a connection to your facilitator. So I think that's really, that storytelling has created some of that connection. It's sort of parallel to that. We've invited some unusual, maybe a different facilitator to participate in some of those modules. So for example, we talked about the top down and the bottom up. We have some recruiters who've contributed a bit, participated in just a small portion of some of our manager training, but come in to bring kind of some of that real world experience, the lived experience of what's it like, what can you expect as a new manager when you're recruiting. And so that sort of bottom up insight, I think, has presented some interest. And third, maybe I'll mention, is our modalities. We've tried to expand beyond that virtual classroom to say, how else do people want to learn? And so our talent development team has done a terrific job of curating, actually our equity, diversity, and inclusion team too, curating just a ton of content anchored to our competencies, so anchored to your learning path, your career path, but different modalities. Some are articles, some are TED Talks, some are our interviews with internal folks talking about their careers and what they've leveraged. So really trying to bring some different opportunities, different, like I said, modalities for some of that self-service piece.
Excellent.
Maybe final, as I know, I think you've got more questions for us. But I think our talent team and our HR ops team work closely together, and we've really tried to bring community to our approach, which has been, again, had to be deliberate in this virtual world. So we run the risk of being isolated in our respective communities of expertise across HR. And so we've created a talent community, an EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion community, a recruiter roundtable. And so pulling together HR ops folks, our HR business partners, HR coordinators who have an interest and passion in that topic, they then go back to their business segment with that expertise. And then, so the learning is through someone who you might be more connected with as a manager, as an employee, you're talking to your HR person, and they've got this content for you too. So
this is wonderful.
Modalities, yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. You know, one theme that seems to kind of thread across all of those responses from the both of you is community and connection. And I, you know, having grown up in education and learning and development and facilitation, most of it was live. And I'd always preferred live in-person training because of the closeness of it with individuals and the opportunity to get to know. And so I loved that human connection community. But right before COVID, I was with a company and I was attending a 3-day long training, and everything was in person and the content was not good. It just wasn't good. It was miserable. And nothing was online. It was all in person. People flew in from all over the country to be at this training. And my feedback to this organization was, you need to update. There are a lot of pieces of this that are outdated. The content doesn't flow well. And I would recommend finding ways to, put information out online so it's a little bit more available after this is over. Because, people don't learn in 3 days. We learn over time, and it takes time. There's a process to it. And then right after that, COVID hits. So I was always curious about what happened to this business. I didn't know how they adapted, because everything was in person and online. And what I learned from that experience was right after that, I joined a new company, right? Not too long after that. And our company is 100% remote. Class Technologies, we are all remote. And I was worried because I wanted that human connection. But I remembered back to this training, is that just because we were all in person, it didn't mean it was an effective training. And it didn't mean I had this sense of community, right? So what I've learned is that, I'm at this new company, everybody's virtual. We can still have a sense of human connection and community, even though there's a screen, right? It's always great to meet and in person, but when that's not available, if we do the right types of behaviors, you talked about modalities, if there's a sense of community and emotional connection with people, we can still achieve that. And finally, I'll add, I feel like during my experience during this last year and a half is that people are more real. When we meet in team meetings, when we meet in one-on-ones, when I'm meeting with clients and doing advising and consulting, people just want to be real. My daughter will walk in the room here and somebody's cat's in the background and the doorbell rings because Amazon just dropped off a package. It's so interesting that used to really make me feel unprofessional when those types of things would happen. And now everybody is in that boat. And it's really, I feel like it removes this facade of work has to be a certain way all the time. And it does infuse more humanity into the workplace and into our profession. And I love that. And with that, Heather, you maybe look like you're going to offer something. So Heather and John, any comments after that? And then we'll jump for a quick Q&A with the group.
Yeah, I'm not a good poker player. That's clear. I think you're so right. It's really, to me, it's been a great equalizer. And the fact that this is happening globally, my prior role was a global role. There were many people I hadn't met, right? And so I agree with you that connection can still be made. We didn't used to have cameras on nearly as often as we've moved to now. And I think that trigger has really helped. But one of the things I think, again, that great equalizer, no matter where you are, no matter, what, it cuts across all aspects of diversity is we're all going through this. And so it's been, I think, even to the basic access for folks who couldn't travel, as you mentioned, right, that travel from one part of the country to another to come attend training. Not everyone could do that. Not everyone could get off a project site, but everyone can carve out an hour instead of 2 full days to go attend this hour training. So I really think it's been fascinating from an inclusion perspective and the opportunities.
Great. Yeah. John, any follow-up there as well?
You know, I don't have much more to add, frankly, because, you know, I think we're all kind of in the same mindset here. You're trying to bring people together, and COVID has, if there's a silver lining to COVID, you know, what was a barrier before geographically is no longer a barrier. You know, we still have time zone differences, but it's no longer a barrier. You can bring a bunch of people from across the world in a room at the same time and have a training. And ne'er before COVID could you truly boast that very as effectively as we can boast it now. And so, from my perspective, I'll never go back for wherever, as long as I'm in the chair. I'll never go back because, you know, there'll be something lost. Now, that said, I do think there's a space in the future, and I know probably you're going to get to this question where, how do you create a nice hybrid model? Where does the convenience of the virtual space meld with the real human interaction that we all crave and need, which is really at the center of what this whole conversation is about. There's something a little bit lost that you cannot replace, that physical in-person interaction. And so I think for the future, the only change I'd like to see is, you know, say people go through a leadership, we have a three-part leadership program. It's individual contributors who are thinking about being managers, tactical manager training, and then enterprise level leadership training. And I think it would be amazing if at the end of graduating that three-part program, we have a special sort of in-person, we finally get to meet these people. We've been in it's a cohort model. So the cohort moves with, and so get that cohort together. They've established the relationships. They have the open, you know, communication that the cohort allowed them. Now they can finally see what the person's like in real life.
In real life, yeah.
In real life, right? And for
so
the
great.
cost savings of COVID, I think we can convince our organizations to spend a couple extra bucks to bring everybody together when we come on the other side of COVID, right?
It makes it all that much more powerful too. Like that human connection is that much more valuable because of the other connections that have already been built and established. I love that comment. And we definitely need to address that as a group here. What I'd like to do for a moment though is we like to involve the audience a little bit. So if there are any questions that are from the audience, if you have anything in chat you'd like to put in, let's start there and just see if there's any questions up to this point. We'd love to answer them and field them a little bit here.
Sure, I can throw a few over to you. We have a lot coming in, so I'll just maybe pick one or two before we dive back into it. One thing I did want to bring up real quickly is a number of people asked about the titles of the two books that I believe John mentioned, and someone answered in the chat, but in case you missed it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was The Business of Learning by Dave Vance and The Power of Moments by Chip Heath and Dan Heath.
That one's special for reals. Yeah, that one is legitimately right now, unintended by Chip and Dan Heath, probably the most impactful read you will do in the COVID space. It's all about experience.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks for doing that. I wrote them both down. I'm glad somebody put them in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, so they'll be in there for anyone who missed it. But one question that came through is, what do you think the key trends of new learning are now, besides, you know, digitizing learning content and not focusing on one size fits all anymore? So I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
So in my opinion, there's a lot of new technology, but I think we're in a space where you're not going to see the technology change there was a big new revelation when the internet came, and all of a sudden we had access to these new media. You know, for those of us who have been around a while, that was an enormous change. I don't know that we'll see an enormous change in technologies. What I think we'll see an enormous change is in the modalities. And so you hear things like micro-learning. It's really more about the approaches and the unique ways you can use those technologies to make the learning more accessible. So from my perspective, one of the things we do at Shark Ninja that I didn't mention is we instituted a thing called Coffee Talks, which is 15 minutes. It's in the first thing in the morning, people can grab a coffee, and it's all focused on people. So we'll pick someone in the organization who wants to talk about an experience, very TED Talk-like. or if you're familiar with The Moth, if you're not familiar with The Moth, it's themoth.com. You should check it out. It's just all storytelling. To Heather's great point about storytelling, we've instituted this as a way to bring humanity back to the learning experience. And so if I'm thinking about like, what are the technologies or what are the trends, I believe it's really about bringing different modalities, making the learning more approachable, and then bringing some humanity back to the experience. Like, what are people's experiences like? And then I think learning through their experiences versus us standing in front of the room as trainers delivering content, so to speak. That'd be my 1-2 punch.
Love that.
I couldn't agree with you more, John. I think I was exactly going to add that in that humanity piece, that the storytelling, the emotion, the connection to the content, and really drawing on folks' experiences. I think if I'm thinking too about where else we're going, whether it's industry leading or not, I think we're talking a lot about bundling, and you talked about sort of your 3-phase leader program. We have a leader program that's very well entrenched in the organization. I think it predates me, so I feel fine about saying it's really top of its game. It wasn't me who created it, but I think, bookending and bundling more learning opportunities so that there isn't sort of a disparate set a menu that people are trying to choose from. There's sort of a more carved out towards a path, and helping people really connect the learning opportunities to the competencies that are being looked for in a role, to the path that they're looking to achieve, and kind of putting it all together. So again, not sure that it's bleeding edge, but I do think that it's going to be of tremendous value to our teams, to our employees.
That's great. I'm going to jump in here too and offer a couple of thoughts. You mentioned, I think everybody's kind of talked about modalities, and there's actually another comment here, more examples of modalities. I used to teach junior high, and modalities was the name of the game. I had 5 minutes of an attention span, and I'm trying to make sure that every 5 minutes we're doing something different. We're switching focus. We change activities. We're now doing this. Now we're standing up. Now we're moving around the room. And we do that in a physical room. And to be honest, I've studied adult learning and I've studied childhood learning. There's not really a lot of difference. And when it comes to attention spans, I treat adults like they're junior high students. That's my approach. I don't know how John and Heather feel, but that's the way I do it. And part of that for me, as far as modalities, is you do that in a physical training room. It's easy to do that. Stand up, everybody here, look at the flip chart, come up to the board, do these different things that just physicality of that happens. That's a little bit more difficult in the virtual world. But if we are changing modalities through our instructional design, we have that opportunity. And fortunately with class, the company I work for, our main solution is, enabling facilitators who are used to a physical training room. We're enabling them and giving them the solutions that they would typically use in a physical training room, and we're now transferring that to the virtual classroom. And that's what's exciting. One of the reasons I love working here is because we have the ability to offer additional pieces that are all in one platform, so that you have the ability to just quickly shift modalities on a dime and get into different ideas. So with that, let's ask, I want to follow up on that, more examples of modalities. John and Heather, let's try to be a little bit more specific on what are the things that are being employed, strategies, and maybe name some, here's a technique I use here to shift modality, and then you can do this. I don't know. This is a little off script, but it was a great question, and I think it's helpful. So what are some examples that you can think of?
You made me think of something that is a big hot button in public education, K-12, which is differentiation of instruction. I just want to tag on this before I offer specific examples. So, when you were talking about changing it up, different modalities, the way public ed talks about it is differentiation. And I think a key part, it's not that we missed it, but to mention it specifically, is the learning styles. And so providing different ways for people to come. So no news to anybody in this webcast, auditory learners, visual learners, kinesthetic learners. Your big question is less what are the specific things, but more how do you appeal the learning to each of those? So you want to have a variety. I mean, I think I think variety is the key, right? So there is some lecture. Some people like lecture, they like taking notes, so there's a structured approach. Then there's dialogue. Like, how are you creating dialogue? I know it's a virtual space, but you can have very meaningful dialogues in a virtual space, and they don't have to be long. How are you creating, little bite-sized media bits? Heather talked about some of the stuff that they're doing where they're bundling together these bite-sized learning. It doesn't take much. It doesn't have to be highfalutin or super fancy production-wise to throw some videos together on a topic. If you have an expert somewhere in your organization, tell them to stick their iPhone in the front of their face, talk about the topic for 3 minutes, and send you the file via Dropbox. If you're deliberate about how you engage the subject matter experts in your organization, give them some direction. So this is what I'd like you to think about doing. Engage everybody in your team to come up with a 3-minute video. We did this in my last organization. We ended up with like 300 videos. We created a whole knowledge base in a matter of months because the lift wasn't heavy. And I think the thing we have to get away from in the learning space especially is making every learning solution a heavy lift. Make it a light lift. And I think that's my answer to the question. I know I'm not giving sort of specific.
Well, I think you gave several specifics. Video, there are a lot, but yeah, no, I love that. It is about how can we shift quickly? How can we build quickly and adapt quickly, as opposed to a 3 to 6 month program design? Like, we don't have that's a lot harder to do nowadays. I love that.
Yeah.
Heather,
I'll have a couple of thoughts. Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think very specifically within anyone who's in Teams, who's in the MS Teams environment, we've used in breakout groups having a wiki. So it's not just one person who can take notes. Everyone can see it. Everyone can actually add into it at the same time. So we're mimicking that flip chart experience. And then depending on how you set up your teams, your facilitator can actually go into each group, share the screen, and it's as if, again, then that group is presenting back their flip chart. So we've structured it to mimic that classroom experience. The pre-read and the pre-work, I would say, we're also looking to leverage, and in different modalities as well. Could be a video to watch, or a podcast to listen to, or an article to read. And then the follow-up, it's some follow-up and prepare for the next one. I'm talking about when we've got a program that has multiple connection points. Sure. But that self-reflection worksheet, so you come in prepared to share what you've learned or how you've applied it, and the preparation of preparing how are you going to bring it back, and then presenting on that. So there's, again, similar things to what you do in a classroom, but giving folks that chance to independently work on this. You've had the sheet in advance, you work through it, and then when you come back on screen, you get to share a little bit of that too. So mixing it up a little bit between the independent and the group, and the small group and the large group, I think.
I love that. Yeah, fantastic. Being able, again, hopefully whoever asked that question, I don't remember who was, Sherry, hopefully that's some additional specifics about modalities. We heard videos and podcasts and worksheets, and all sorts of other options. One thing I wanted to mention is, darn it, it just left me. So let's move on to this next question I had. Organizations are soliciting feedback. So a few of you mentioned, John, I think you said preferences and making sure that we're adapting to learning styles. So what are some ways that your organizations are addressing preferences in learning styles when you're developing your trainings? How are you collecting the data? How do you know what people prefer? And then two, how are your development processes helping you address those different modalities and the different preferences for learning?
You want me to take that first? Okay, go ahead, Heather. Yeah.
No, please. Go for it.
No. You go ahead. Go ahead.
We're too kind. So I think, it's, I don't know that this is new pandemic, based on pandemic really, but in terms of gathering that feedback, course evaluations, we're no stranger to those. The virtual course evaluations for some of our courses are of course new, where we've switched from that in class. And so paying attention early days after the switch to what do we need to do differently. We got feedback about cameras being on was a benefit. We got feedback about, as I mentioned, folks being able to attend from elsewhere and how positive that was. And then just paying attention as we usually do to what is landing well, what courses are landing well, what's getting registered and what's not. So our that monthly blast about what learning is available is a good regular source of feedback for us, just purely based on registrations.
Fantastic. Yeah. Understanding the data, using your data points. That's excellent. John, to you, any additional data points outside of what Heather mentioned, or ways that you're collecting that information?
Maybe nuances. So two bits that could a layer on top of it. One is if you have a learning management system. Most learning management systems worth their salt today have a feature you can turn on that allow people to give a rating to the trainings. Let them do that. I mean, that's kind of uncomfortable for organizations. You spend all this time on a training and then you turn on the rating feature, like, Amazon, and then on public display is 3 stars. So that don't let the fear of failing hold you back from turning some of those settings on, because you don't want those types of trainings floating around. All of us have had to deal with things that we've developed that are not well received, and so you have to know. And so let your learning management system do a lot of the work for you. Turn those ratings on. Turn the feedback feature on if you can collect qualitative feedback via the learning management system. The other thing that we've done in COVID that has worked really well, because we've all done Kirkpatrick, and the problem with Kirkpatrick is once the training is over, finding the time to meet with managers to understand the differences, getting people to complete the surveys. I mean, I could go down the list. We've all experienced it. So what we do that has been a game changer is we build the focus group discussion on the quality of the training, the content of the training into the training. So we do an orientation leading up to the training, and we say, as part of the formal curriculum, your obligation as a leader is to make this better for the next group. So the last session, we're going to do 2 hours of content, and the last hour is going to be, give us your direct feedback on experiences. This is a safe space. It has been game-changing because we don't not get feedback.
Right.
We don't have the space for feedback. It's built into it. Now, we still have to chase managers for what's the impact of the organization, what have been the impact of behaviors. That's always going to be the chase.
That's all the extras, the follow-up stuff.
Yeah, like it gets added to people's plates. You got to be persistent. No real, no, I'm in the same space as every other person on this call. Like, yeah, right. You're not going to call me back, but you got to be persistent. You got to try to get some of that feedback. But that adding it into the training and making it part of the formal curriculum changes the dynamic of what that feedback's for.
Certainly.
And I would definitely recommend. It's been very successful for us.
I love that. Yeah, no, it's a lot of times it's an afterthought, right? It's like, okay, if we have 5 minutes left, everybody, here's a link to the training. We'd love your survey. We'd love your feedback. Build it in and make it a valuable component of the training. I love that idea. We're a little bit short on time. There was one question in here I wanted to address. So maybe, you both have kind of mentioned it. You both referred to a leadership program that is broken up. It's not just a one-time thing, but there's a series of things that are going on. And one of the questions in here was, how are you engaging senior leaders virtually? So if you're doing these leadership training programs, I'd love to hear your thoughts around breaking up. It's not all in person anymore. So how are you doing that virtually in addition to maybe in person? And we only have a little bit of time, so maybe 30 seconds to a minute each. John, you want to start?
Sure. We take a little bit of a different tack, believe it or not. We don't include senior leadership. This may shock everybody. Now, we certainly get their input. We certainly want to make sure that our aims are aligned. But what we're trying to do, and not to infer that it's not a safe space if leadership is in the room, but we all have this problem. Like senior leadership in the room, everybody sort of sits up straight, and they don't want to be themselves. And so one of the things we've done deliberately is to say, for our leadership development programs, let's push everything off the table. Let's talk about leadership competencies and concepts candidly, what it looks like here at Shark Ninja, and then make sure that we maintain that safe space. And we've decided that the safest place is for them to just be with their peers, their colleagues. And we made the deliberate decision. It hasn't been easy, and not everybody sort of adapts to the idea because you always want senior leadership directly involved. But I make the argument that the safety and the candid conversation and people being willing to share their true challenges untethered is incredibly cathartic and valuable to the leadership development experience. So we made that conscious decision.
Fantastic. Heather, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll actually maybe surprise John a bit by echoing that. And I think what we're starting to talk about now, so originally, and this is way back when, the program was conceived of, any leaders could take this, it's a series of 13 modules, and some of them are self-study, some of them are instructor-led, et cetera, and leaders at any level. And then we sort of realized that no, truly the content wasn't for any leader. The content was more at that manager and director level. And so I think, to John's point, you create more safety when you have folks who are peers and can really, then you're creating a network as well. It isn't always cohort based the way we run it, but that still, you create connections, you create relationships with folks that you can then ask about content application afterwards. What we're talking about now and starting to create in a more structured way is for that next level of leader. And that could be folks who've, directors who've been through this program. It's been a little while now. They're looking for their next learning opportunity. Or it could be executives new to ACON, and you want to give them a bit of a flavor of what do we do here and how do we do it. And so bundling something that is more geared to that level of leader and in a cohesive way. So the leadership piece, we're not forgetting about developing that senior leader, our VPs and senior directors and so forth, but providing a space that is, again, for them, it creates that safety and ability to talk, again, amongst your peers. So I think that is important. The one other thing, if I've not run out of my 1 minute, is bringing senior leaders in as facilitators sometimes. And that's really deliberate, very focused on content, their experience on a project, their experience as a project director. And so that kind of brings some of the concepts to life for folks who are, learning about that next level leadership.
I love that. There was one question in here that was not just how do we engage senior leaders in the virtually, but how do we specifically bring senior leadership into and get them on board with a hybrid model in the future? I feel like that's a great way to do it, is bringing them in as a facilitator. Let them see the realities of facilitation. That's a great way for them to just learn for themselves firsthand what it might be like and why hybrid is not only impactful and required, but effective and can be effective. There were a few other questions in here regarding different ways to engage learners and measure engagement, what technologies are in there. I'll just say, anybody who's interested in taking a look at the class platform and the way that the technology can offer additional engagement techniques and also data and metrics in the live session, my class team's happy to do that. And let's wrap it up with this, Heather and John. Any technologies that you're aware of that you can utilize to help with engagement in a virtual classroom setting and engagement and then analytics around involvement with the class?
So I mentioned we're using Teams. So just the polls, the breakout rooms, the flip chart kind of, trying to leverage that. The attendance list is a great way, we're finding too, to be able to follow up with folks afterwards, and some of that continuity or sending out to folks who actually did arrive and attend. That's been a really useful new feature in Teams.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah, so instead of just your invitees, right, you can survey your actual attendees. And then I think the only other technology I'd mention is we're with SuccessFactors, and so reporting and some analytics that come out of our LMS. And I think, John, you mentioned that too, right? Understanding behind the scenes what's successful and what's not, and or needs improvement. So this would be what I'd mention there.
Thank you, Heather. John, back to you.
I would offer very little more, honestly. I would say that the LMS is your friend. Don't be afraid to really use the LMS. Just managing your rosters. There's a lot of data that goes unnoticed if you don't spend time with it. And then I would just echo the idea of whatever polling software you're using, just make sure that at the end of it, you can save the data. Because the collecting data in the moment is the more valuable than trying to send a survey out after. So, given the suggestion I made earlier about building it in, build those survey questions into the content in the moment as you're tackling topics. And at the end, make sure that you can save that and save it anonymously. And then you can start to map out engagement trends, skills trend, whatever it is, but you want to make sure that you use a software like Poll Everywhere or another that lets you save that data.
Yeah, fantastic. I think we're here at the end of our time today. John and Heather, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your wealth of knowledge and your experience. It's been quite the last 18 months, and all of us are feeling it. But this is really good. There's a lot of good ideas here out of this session today. One final comment here. You mentioned chats. Olivia's asking, is there a way to save the chat? I have no idea. I'll turn that over to Ashley and team.
Yeah, I can chime in about that. I think Steve may have answered the question in the Q&A function, but what we'll do is when we send a follow-up email to all attendees of today's and all registrants of today's webinar, we can include a copy of the chat so that you'll have access to that beyond this webinar. It's a pretty popular request because a lot of great ideas always end up coming out of the chat and great resources and whatnot, and today was no exception. So we'll be sure to follow up with that. And yes, I would just echo what you said, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A special thank you to you, Ben, to John, Stephanie, for your discussion this afternoon and all the great takeaways. We invite you all to join us for the next webinar in this 4-part series, which is the promise of blended learning in 2021 and beyond. And that will take place Wednesday, September 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. On behalf of talent management, I wish everyone a safe and productive week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And I'll pass it back to Steve to wrap things up.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you, Ben, Heather, and John, for taking all this time to present all this great information with us. We really do appreciate it, like Ashley just noted. Be sure to check out our next webinar. I apologize. That's happening tomorrow. It's not going to be included in this series. It's actually a different one, but be sure to check it out. It is titled Consulting Firms, Are You Ready to Future-Proof Your Reskilling, Upskilling, and Outskilling Offerings? Happening tomorrow, September 15th, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. With that, this concludes today's webcast. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.